My grandparents lived on a pretty large farm in southwest Michigan. Being a rural area, there's tons of wildlife, and growing up, exploring the woods around the farm, I became pretty familiar with the animals that lived around there, such as deer, coyotes, woodchucks, etc. Well, one day I wander off to go fishing. The spot I like to fish was only about half a mile from my grandparents' house, so I was down there pretty regularly. I made it to my fishing hole, and so far everything seemed normal, only this time I felt like I was being watched. I fished for maybe 15 minutes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and I hightailed it out of there. I made it about halfway back to the house when I heard something large running through the woods behind me, so I dropped my gear and ran for my life. I just made it out of the tree line and looked back to see what was chasing me, and when I turned, I saw a huge creature, bigger than anything I'd ever seen in those woods. I didn't stop running, but I got a good look at it, and the best way I can describe it is a wolf man. It was tall and had dark matted fur and the face of a dog. It ran on all fours, but looked like it may have been bipedal. It never followed me out of the woods, but stopped right at the tree line and ran the other way. I got back to the house and told my grandparents what had happened, and we grabbed guns and headed out to try and find it. But all we found were tracks that neither we nor the DNR could identify, because it looked like a wolf print, but there's no wolves in that area, and it was too large to be a wolf. My grandparents never believed me, but I still swear something chased me out of those woods. Here's the story that really scared me. I was 13 and had just reconnected with my father as he was leaving rehab. So we arranged for me to come and stay a weekend at his house. I arrived, and he had a new girlfriend who gave me really weird vibes. Not bad, just weird. An important part of this story is understanding that my father and his girlfriend at the time are both Native American and both have very deep spiritual connection. Inside the house, there's a prayer altar of sorts, but I had never seen something like it growing up. It had a deer skull and other animal parts on it. The whole thing radiated this bad energy, and I refused to go near it. Well, that night, his girlfriend had done some prayer ritual of sorts, and had been speaking in tongues and convulsing in front of the altar. And as I watched her, I noticed a dark apparition hovering above her. After she was done, there was this energy about her, and in the house, that I can't even describe. It unsettled my spirit, like nothing ever had before. Well, that night, I was asleep in bed, and I woke up to my bed, shaking and jumping with the frame slamming into the floor. I screamed for my dad, and I heard him scream almost at exactly the same time. We both ran out of our rooms, and as I passed, I looked into his room to see his girlfriend throwing herself around the floor, bending in ways I didn't think possible. Suddenly, everything stopped as fast as it had started, but my dad and I grabbed a few belongings and stayed at a motel that night. I never went back to that house, and thankfully, never saw that woman again.
For the past 4 years, I've worked as a funeral director and embalmer at 2 different locations and separate buildings. In my line of work, of course, the nature of the work would be unsettling to most, especially the aspect of the task completed on the descendants themselves. As an embalmer, I've performed some gruesome actions, all for the betterment of someone's loved one's appearance and their expectations during the viewing, during their visitation period. I'm telling you all of this to set the stage that I'm not scared easily from the unsettling, and I have a rock-solid stomach that could handle any smell or sight that we come across that any embalmer would see at some point. As there are 2 locations that I frequently visit for my work, I'll name them Location 1 and Location 2, just for simplicity's sake. At the first location, I was coming back from a death call at a hospital around 2 a.m. into a 130-year-old funeral home. I had a descendant in the back of the van, which seems creepy enough to most, but it's the reality that most people don't realize is a fairly common occurrence. My first major encounter happened sometime after I arrived to the funeral home and started my normal embalming procedures. During the procedures, of course, I'm not paying extreme attention to my surroundings of the room, but I had noticed a nuisance of chill that wasn't normal, as I had embalmed many times before and never noticed anything like it. I just shrugged it off and continued on. After I had completed, I walked into the casket showroom, which is directly next to the embalming room, and flipped on the lights. And in the corner next to the end of 2 caskets was a black mist that seemed to dissipate into the corner of the room. Plain as day, in the fully lit room, I was absolutely rocked by the realization that me and the descendant were not alone in this funeral home. Someone had been watching me the entire time. The second occurrence was when I was leaving one night around 11 p.m. after a long day of death calls and funerals. Every evening when we leave, we go from room to room and make sure every light is off to save on the electric bill. I had sat down in my car and looked up into one of the rooms on the 2nd level and noticed a lamp was on. I decided not to go back in and to get it in the morning. No big deal, right? Yeah, I wish. The specific room was the location manager's office, and it looked as if the light was emanating from the middle of the room. Just some context. The lamp in question was originally owned by the location manager's wife, who has passed and also went through the same funeral home he worked at. He had brought it from home to use there in his office because it was no longer needed at his house. That next day, I went up there to check on the room and to turn the lamp off. The problem was that the lamp emanating the light the night before was sitting on the middle of his desk, not even plugged in. I was the first employee there that morning, and no one had been there during the night for any reason at all. Also, when seeing the lamp on the night before, I knew the funeral home was empty, because I was the last person to leave. Now, these 2 occurrences aren't alone, but they are the most notable, because I can't explain them away. There are several hundred times that I felt watched, or something seems to move in the corner of my eye. There has also been many times where I hear someone whisper, "Hello?" directly into my ear. There are so numerous that it's hard to keep when or how they happen straight. But I guess that's just the baggage of the job. At the second location, I actually lived in the top of the funeral home for a period of 6 to 8 months. Because, well, free room and board in a fully furnished apartment and the ease of being able to just wake up and clock in the morning without even having to drive anywhere is a luxury most people don't think about. The first happening was a subtle, but not so subtle moment. A few weeks into my initial move into the apartment upstairs of the funeral home, I was sleeping in my room upstairs and was awoken by the sounds of stairs creaking, as if someone was walking up them. It was 1 a.m., and I knew no one was there but me. Usually when a death call happens, I know about them because I am called by my answering service to go get them. At this point, I am frozen in place. Who the hell would be here at this time of night without me knowing about it? All of the doors are locked to enter the funeral home, and so is my bedroom door. The freezing continues until whatever is outside my door comes to it and knocks twice. I say nothing. After several moments of complete silence, the creaking starts again, but back down the stairwell. I sat totally silent the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep at all. Nothing else happened, but I was absolutely rattled by that experience. Whatever that was, knew I was up there, and I didn't like the thought of that at all. I had no other choice but to continue to live there because of my financial position at the time. I couldn't really afford anything else. My second experience there was in the evening as well. I was eating a TV dinner in the kitchen there in my apartment. I looked up from my food and watched the doorknob turn, and the door opened as if someone just walked through and shut it back. I just sat there, mouth agape, and was totally flabbergasted. I was also there alone that night as well. There were no breezes or changes in air pressure that could force to open and shut a door like it did that night. Finally, and the most recent. Yesterday, I was sitting on the couch downstairs on break during the middle of the day. I was alone again. If there is nothing going on as far as funerals or arrangement conferences on the weekends, we keep the doors locked and the lights off. I rose from the couch and was walking into the main hall of the funeral home. I noticed a man standing in the doors to the funeral chapel. I said aloud to him, "Hey, you." The man didn't turn or say anything. He just walked away from me and turned the corner. I followed him into the chapel to try to get his attention. I rounded that same corner and found absolutely nothing. By this time, I was freaking out. The man was wearing a navy blue pinstripe suit with a white collared button-up, gray slicked back hair, and was about the same height as me. He was an older fellow and was a little hunched over in the back. For reference, I am 6'2". I immediately called the manager of the funeral home and told him what had happened and described the man. He told me that I had probably seen his old manager, who had also lived in the apartment that I currently do, several years ago. Everything made sense in that moment.
When I was little, we had a house in a small town in Georgia with a massive forest behind it. One thing my mum does that always annoyed my dad was take care of family relics. Back then, we probably had about 100 family mirrors passed down since the 1910s. A few of the oldest ones were upstairs, but a lot made it up a hallway behind the bedrooms in the basement. There was a bathroom across from the hall, where you could stay and see down the hall. I remember as a kid one time, I woke up in the middle of the night, tired and having to pee. The lights were dim at night in the basement. I thought I saw my sister go upstairs, so I went upstairs. Frankly, I never heard the door open to the stairs. I went up, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. So I decided to go back downstairs to go to the bathroom. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I saw a figure turn to go down the mirror hallway. I got curious, and when I got to the bathroom, I looked on instinct and saw a tall creature-like woman with long dread hair and a massive jawline. Her neck bent. She was probably 8 foot tall. She had to sort of bend over to fit in the hallway. I immediately went back to the bathroom and closed it, locking the door behind me and taking the mirror off the wall and facing towards the wall. I heard footsteps, and then my sister knocked on the door. She asked, "Are you okay? I heard you leave your room. Can you open the door?" I told her I was good and kept it locked. The voice changed from my sister's to a deep woman's voice with a scratchy tone. It said, "Open the door, now." I laid till morning in the bathroom, unable to leave. The mirror shook a few times in there, but other than that, nothing weird in the bathroom. When I opened the door in the morning, there were scratches all over. I later got grounded for the scratches. Looking back, it was a scary time. I found out later my brothers played with the Ouija board. It wasn't the only time I had seen it. It would visit me when I was sharing a room with my brother during renovations of my room. It would knock on his door, asking to come in. I made sure it stayed locked. I always got grounded for the scratches. Since a young age, I have annually made a trip to Sedona, Clarksdale, and Jerome, Arizona, due to some family history in the area. My great-great-grandparents were born and eventually died there. Jerome is a former ghost town. Its main hotel, the Grand Jerome, served as a hospital and psych ward during the boomtown mining days. Because of this, it has a long history of death, including at least one murder, suicides, and various miners and town people succumbing to illness. The hotel has a very heavy feeling to it. Many people experience paranormal happenings, so much so that Ghost Adventures filmed an episode there. The hotel offers ghost tours in which they provide each guest in the group an EMF reader, a temperature reader, and a list of vacant rooms. The tour takes place at night, and they darken hallways to add to the effect. Being the paranormal enthusiast I joined my dad and grandmother on the tour, and had generally excited feelings. While you can definitely sense spirits around, there isn't a strong negative energy. On the third floor, which, if my memory serves me well, used to be the psych ward, we were walking through the hallways when I heard some shuffling in one of the rooms. I asked our host if the list showed any names assigned to the room, and she replied, "No, it's vacant." She opened the door for me and allowed me to go inside. My EMF reader, which had not made so much as a peep all night, started picking up something as I neared the bed. The closer I got, the stronger it beeped. My dad, hearing the commotion, followed me in the room and started snapping pictures. The hairs on my body pricked up and I felt a chill. Although this could be due to the fact that I was standing near a window, I brought the EMF reader closer to the bed, where it maxed out the reading and emitted a steady beep. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a rocking chair on the opposite side of the room start to rock. I exclaimed my excitement, which attracted other folks who came in and tried out their EMFs. Same thing. Everyone's EMF reader was spiking in an exact spot over the bed. Later, upon looking at the pictures we took throughout the ghost tour, we were stunned to see not only an orb above my EMF reader, but an imprint on the bed that no one was allowed to touch. The imprint was exactly where my EMF reader was going off, and the picture was taken before everyone came into the room. I didn't touch the bed, nor did my dad, so either it was left by someone else, or it was a confirmation that something was there. The whole experience was awesome, and it fueled my desire to explore more haunted places. While I'm not a skeptic, I want more confirmation and proof than belief to fully accept that ghosts are real. My time at the Grand Jerome, which I've gone back to since the ghost tour several years ago, always leaves me feeling certain that something is out there. This happened about 6 years ago. and is something I've rarely talked about out of fear for whatever thing happened to reach out to me. The nightmare randomly happened one night and then continued for every night for the next 3 months. I was in a swampy forest, lightning from the storm and the moon my only means of light. I'm running from this thing, and I can never exactly see him, but I know he's right behind me. I'm running for what feels like hours until I trip over a root ball and fall into a deeper puddle. He's on me in an instant, hand on the back of my neck as he pushes my face into the water. I couldn't move no matter how hard I wanted to, and before I completely black out from him drowning me, I feel him stab me in the back, almost directly through my spine. It goes black, and I wake up after that, freaked the hell out, but just blame my vivid imagination. Now, I've always had more of a sixth sense, but I hadn't had anything reach out to me or done any stupid stuff to have him attached to me yet. My Ouija board fun happened a few years later. As I said, I thought it was my imagination until it happened the night after, and then every night for the next week. As I mentioned, it goes on for 3 months. I've had reoccurring nightmares and dreams before. I used to have a funny one of demonic gingerbread men before Christmas for a few years. I knew this was different though. It felt so real, different from my other nightmares. I knew it was wrong when about 2 weeks in, I started getting sleep paralysis almost every night. I know that can bring hallucinations with it, so I can't confirm everything I saw while under was actually there. But whenever I got stuck with my eyes open, he was there, at the foot of my bed or in the corner of my room, staring at me. No movement, no noise, just a massive 8-foot-tall shadow with white orbs for eyes. He looked humanoid. I used to think he was wearing a trench coat and a fedora for a while, but he gave off a mist that changed what his outline looked like, so I can't say for sure. He was never there when I broke the paralysis or woke up. I'm not sure how it works, but I could feel him. I dubbed him the Shadow Man, and he may have a correlation with the shadow people since he fits the description. He freaked me out so bad, I went for days without sleeping. Rather deal with a migraine than him. But about 2 months in, I saw him all the time instead of just during paralysis. In the locker room at school, in empty hallways, anytime there was an expanse of dark. I do think I was slightly paranoid, which didn't bode well with it at all. But he was attached to me, not my house or my room. It just stopped almost 3 months later. I haven't actually seen him since. I felt him anytime I tried to talk about him, or felt him outside my room when I moved rooms. He only watched me, never tried to hurt me in the real world. A year after they stopped, his presence just disappeared. He still scares me though. I'm still not keen on the dark or thunderstorms. I only felt safe to talk about this since it's been almost a year since I've moved from the house where it happened, and I haven't felt him at my new house. I never want to meet him again, and still have no clue what he was. And some info I couldn't place in, but may be of interest, was my cat wouldn't go into my room when it was happening, which honestly concerned me the most because he always slept with me. I also tried to just block this from my memory, and in my senior year of high school, I had a few people in my grade mention the handprints I used to have on my neck. This was 4 years later and I was confused at first. Before, I had had marks after the dreams, but it only happened a handful of times. I really thought it was all in my head until they brought it up, but sometimes I still think it was. Nothing else I've ever experienced compares to it, and I've never talked to anyone in real life with a similar experience. I'd like to think that he wasn't demonic, but he definitely wasn't nice. When I was in high school, my best friend and I were inseparable. I stayed at his house every weekend, and we would always stay up late watching ghost videos or paranormal stuff on YouTube. One night, he rushed back to his room and slammed the door. He told me something was in the living room. It was a tall shadow, shaped like a woman, and it freaked him out. After debating it for a few moments, we decided to both go check it out together. However, when we went out there, nothing was there. There was nothing even resembling a person. That night, something woke me up at 4 a.m. I looked up from the couch I was sleeping on to see my friend on the other side of the room. Standing at his feet was a girl with long black hair in a grey floral dress, and she was pointing at him. I laid back down and hid under the covers. After what felt like ages, I looked up again, and she was gone. I woke him up and told him what I saw. We both stayed up the rest of the night. About a week later, we saw her again, always at night and always pointing at one of us. This continued for a while, so much so that we got used to it and were no longer scared. We named her Evangeline. Her hair almost covered her face, and she kind of looked like the monster from the movie The Ring. After a while, we started to realize a pattern. Evangeline only appeared when something bad or upsetting was going to happen to one of us. Whoever she pointed at is who it would happen to. Sometimes it'd be serious. Sometimes it'd be simple upsetting things. The first night I saw her, she pointed at my friend, and a few days later, his cousin died. The first time she pointed at me, my first love cheated on me. This went on throughout all of high school. We actually started to greet her and be almost friendly with Evangeline. When the time came for me to move to another state for college, I saw her one last time. However, this time she was in my room, which never happened. I was worried about what her appearance could mean, but instead of pointing at me, she held her arms open. It was like she was saying, "Good." I opened my arms in response, smiled, and nodded. After that, neither of us saw Evangeline again, yet we look back on her fondly. Whether she was a ghost or a guardian spirit, we'll never know. But we're both oddly grateful for the experience. I've had a couple of experiences that are still to this day the weirdest ones. The first one, I have unilateral hearing loss, which means I'm 100% deaf in one ear, and hear perfectly fine from the other one. During the past years, I developed tinnitus, a really annoying buzzing or ringing in my ears. It's usually quite muted, but sometimes, for no reason, it gets really loud, so much that I feel my eardrums vibrating with the noise, both of them, even the deaf one. During one of these episodes, it got so loud, it was like having a radio with static noise on full volume pressed against my ears. Suddenly, among the noise, I heard loud and clear a male voice saying, "Help me," twice. It was in Spanish, which is my native language. It came from inside my head, and it made my eardrums vibrate just like the static noise. The loud tinnitus kept going for about 5 seconds after that, and then it subsided. My ears felt cold inside afterwards. The second one, my older sister and I had to share my room once because we had a visitor occupying hers. I slept in my bed and she slept on a metal frame cot that's usually stored under my bed. We didn't bother unfolding the legs, so she was next to my bed but close to the floor. In the middle of the night, I briefly woke up and turned over so that I faced the room and not the wall. And I saw my sister's head is right next to my bed, as if she's sitting on her pillow. She was staring at me with the most hatred-filled stare I have ever seen. She had never looked at me like that before, like she wanted me dead or something. So I asked her what was wrong, wondering if maybe I'd snored or something, and she just blinked and slid down her bed. From my point of view, I just saw the head going downwards, eyes closed. I leaned down from the edge of my bed and saw my sister fast asleep hugging her pillow, covered in blankets. Nothing out of the ordinary. 2 things about this. 1, the cot being metal makes a lot of squeaking noises when you move, even a little. Certainly, it would have been really noisy if my sister had rearranged herself so fast. I didn't hear any noises while she was laying down. And 2, I told her about what happened in the morning, and she assured me 100% that she hadn't woken up at all, and that she wasn't mad at me for anything. We still have no idea what happened, what I saw, why it hated me so much, and why the heck it looked exactly like my sister. I've been curious for years about this thing that crossed my path in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I'm pretty sure I was a senior in high school, so it was around 2011. My group of friends and I were always obsessed with haunted, creepy things and places. I think our interest began as kids. We lived across the street from an abandoned mental asylum that we would regularly sneak into. So naturally, when we hear about Downington's twin tunnels, we were psyched to go. This place is still on a drivable road. It's 2 attached tunnels with 1 active tunnel and 1 completely grown over with brush and water, kind of like a swamp. They are pretty long and curved, so there's a point in the tunnel where no light can enter, making it pitch black. The legend is that there had been some deaths and murders there. Supposedly, a pregnant woman hung herself from the middle of the tunnels, and years later, in the 90s, there was a woman's body chopped up and found stuffed in a suitcase, which was placed in the tunnels. So according to folklore, if you walk through the tunnels at night, you emerge from the other end with scratches on your arms. Or if you drive through it, as we did, you can hear the feet of the suicidal pregnant woman dangling on the top of your car. So we go, and I'm driving. We drive through a few times, park in the middle, turn the lights and the car off, roll down the windows, and wait to see anything. It's a bust at first, and since I'm driving, I'm ready to call it a night, and a friend eagerly says, "One more try." So that's what we do. I park in the middle, turn the car lights and the car off, and sit there silently, waiting for something to happen. Now, since this is still an active tunnel, I remind you, I have my keys in the ignition, ready to be turned on in an instant, so that if a car comes speeding down, I can quickly turn the car on and flash the lights to let them know we're here. So I'm staring at the mouth of the tunnel, when all of a sudden, I see a dark figure walk across the mouth of the tunnel. I'm amazed, mind you, almost don't believe it, until it turns into the tunnel and starts walking directly towards the car. I can only describe it as an extremely tall humanoid figure with broad shoulders, long arms that dangle almost to its knees, and a rectangular shaped head with no distinguishing features, just completely black. At this point, it's getting closer, and I'm so freaked out that I instinctively turn the car on. The lights flash on, and the thing vanishes. I immediately turn to my friend, and he says, "Did you just see that?" And I reply, "Yes." Although it felt nice to have another person validate what I had just seen, it has left me completely uneasy for years. This is something that happened about 20 years ago. I was about 5, and some of my cousins were living with us at my parents' house. We were having a party during the summer, and my cousins had suggested that we go into the basement to escape the heat. So we run downstairs into our unfinished basement. Now, our basement was mostly storage, and had a lot of my recently deceased grandfather's things. On a table, among miscellaneous other things, was a plastic tub of pieces of bazooka bubblegum. We all kind of thought, sweet, free gum. So we all grabbed a piece and ran upstairs. My parents were confused about how we got the bubblegum, and we told them where we found it. We went back downstairs to show them, and it was gone. No one else had gone into the basement after us. I come to find out later that my grandfather loved bazooka gum, and that while he was a caring man, he was not exactly a sharer. He was notorious for not letting his kids or grandkids touch his snacks. My grandmother has admitted to having a lot of experiences around her house. She's convinced he's looking after her, like the touch lamp coming on as she comes home at night, her TV turning off as she's about to fall asleep. A bunch of wholesome little things. So this event happened about 14 or 15 years ago, when my sister was living with me. My boyfriend at the time was staying overnight, which he didn't do often. Sometime in the night, I felt myself wake up, but couldn't move. I'm not sure if I was fully awake, if it was sleep paralysis or what. Immediately after I became aware, I felt myself being pushed off the bed and found myself on the side of the bed on the ground, unable to rise. I tried several times to get back up into bed, but felt this weight on me, preventing me. Finally, I was able to haul myself back up to my then boyfriend, who was still sleeping. Terrified, I shook him awake and urgently whispered that something was trying to push me out of bed, but that I didn't know what it was. Half awake, he said, "You're scaring me." I said, "I'm scaring myself." We both laid back at that point to attempt to go back to sleep, and I felt the weight on me again, preventing me from moving. It was heavy and trying to push me off again. I was able to turn to my boyfriend again and call out his name. He had turned away from me onto his side to go back to sleep, and it didn't appear that he had heard me. With effort, I pushed myself half up and called him again. As I was looking at him, still sleeping, I heard a distinctive sound coming from him that sounded like the low drone you hear when monks chant. A low voice, saying something but nothing, speaking in tongues, that was coming from my then boyfriend. It started low and got louder over the course of about 5 seconds. He then moved, so I saw his mouth. Freaked out, I laid back down and eventually went back to sleep. I was still totally affected by what had happened when I woke up the next morning, and I told my then boyfriend and sister the whole story. He thought it was pretty wild, but remembered nothing. My sister was spooked because she had said her bedside clock stopped in the night. It stopped at exactly 3 a.m. I never encountered this type of situation again, but did see a spirit a few years later while in the same bed and apartment. That was about 12 years ago. I was living by myself and had invited a toy boy over late one night. I was tired and so got into bed to wait for him to call to let me know he was there and to let him in. I must have fallen asleep because something woke me up. I opened my eyes to see a taller man in his late 20s or 30s, standing, facing the left side of my bed, staring straight ahead with a neutral expression. He had thick, bright blonde hair and was wearing a colourful ski knit sweater and matching hat. He looked like a regular person at first, though I suppose maybe a little brighter, because I could see him so well in the dark without my glasses. As I stared groggily at him, trying to figure out who he was and why he was here, he looked nothing like the guy I was expecting. He slowly pixelated away. At that point, I became wide awake, turned on my bedside lamp and sat upright in bed, suddenly spooked as hell and realizing what I had seen wasn't of this dimension on Earth. The entity's presence was never threatening, and I got the feeling he was just passing through. It was bizarre and spooky. Needless to say, I never saw the entity again. I sometimes live with my boyfriend and his family, as my own home life isn't the greatest. We've been dating for about 6 years, and I'm a 22-year-old female. He's 22 as well. He has told me that all his life he has experienced strange things from time to time, including having horrible dreams about hellfire and skeletons, seeing full-bodied apparitions as a child, and also shadows always lurking in the corner of his bedroom. I could honestly go on forever about everything he's experienced, but I'd rather ask about what's been happening more recently. I noticed about 2 years ago, after he and I had been dating, according to him, the activity had been ramping up and becoming more common than before when he was younger. I noticed that sometimes his house gives off a creepy vibe, but this was hard to detect because, honestly, the place is decorated and arranged very pleasantly, and it's located in a beautiful part of where we live, in somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Well, especially in his bedroom is where we notice the creepiness coming from, which we think is also the center of all the activity. So the house was built in the 60s. It's a double wide with an extended room built in after, if that helps. And there used to be an older couple that lived in his bedroom, and one day The wife died of natural causes in his room. For a while, my boyfriend and I had the theory that the activity was being caused by the spirit of this woman that wasn't happy that a teenage or young adult boy had been living in her room for years. By the way, he has lived in this house his whole life. But that theory got debunked when his mum brought in a Catholic medium over to the house. She said she detected a presence that was actually male, and she didn't want to say if she felt the spirit was human or something else, which I find odd. Honestly though, this woman wasn't very helpful. However, I do think she's right. Whatever it is, has a male presence. I know this because really one of the only times that it's ever messed with me, personally, was about 2 years ago. It was in the morning. I didn't have anything going on that particular day, so I stayed in my boyfriend's bed to sleep in, while he got up for work. Eventually, he and his dad, the only other 2 people there that morning, went outside to get things ready for their job. They work together doing construction. So to set the scene, I'm laying in his bed somewhere between sleep and awake, while he and his dad are outside. In the bedroom, there's a window to the outside where they are getting things ready. It was closed, but it allows me to hear them chatting outside sometimes. It's really important to note that when they are talking to each other outside, their voices sound muffled and distant. So all of a sudden, I hear a voice inside the room with me. It's a deep male voice, and he goes, "I used to be great." I kind of started to get up and look around while still laying in bed. Now, I have to say that this isn't usually like me. I do kind of get scared easily, but I think because it was morning and not nighttime, I felt braver. And another weird thing was that I didn't even care, which is very, very strange of me, because I'm always fascinated by the evidence of ghosts existing. Maybe it's because I was so tired on top of it, I'm not sure. Anyway, I don't think it liked that I was ignoring it one bit, because then I feel as though something has rushed up to my face. Whatever this thing was, got up in my face while I was laying in bed and said something else. Unfortunately, I can't remember. But it was still this guttural, scary, deep male voice, and they sounded angry. And I could even feel cold air being blown into my face, as if you felt the breath of someone on your face as they're talking really close to you. So, once again, this is so strange of me. What did I do? I just rolled over and tried to get more sleep, completely just trying to ignore what was going on. I guess maybe at the time, I felt that was my only option. I eventually did fall asleep after a couple of minutes, and when I did, I had the first, and hopefully only, sleep paralysis dream I've ever had. It was a typical setup. I wake up to find that the surroundings looked just like the room I'm sleeping in, except I can't move. The only different thing was that there was a cat on my chest, a calico cat to be specific. I only stayed like this for a couple of seconds, because in my head, I was like, screw this, and started to try to sit up. And then when I did, my perception of reality started to shake and rattle, like if you were looking at things through the viewfinder of a camera, and then you start shaking the camera. Kind of hard to explain, but it just looked like all of my surroundings were starting to fall apart. And then the cat on my chest started to hiss and meow, and it swiped at me in the face. And then I woke up, lying on my back in my boyfriend's room, totally normal. So yeah, other strange things happened, like for a long stretch of months in the summer to be specific. We would hear scratching everywhere in the walls. Wasn't always dedicated to one particular wall or room or anything, just randomly, whatever room you were in. This especially happened to me in particular. You would just hear scratching right wherever you were, like as if it was trying to be as close to you as possible. I know it could just be animals living in the walls, but in the summer, it makes no sense as it can get so incredibly hot. In my opinion, no animal would want to be living in those walls in the summer, and it would happen at all different times of the day. Another thing is that my boyfriend has 2 dogs, and every so often, they both freak out and bark at nothing. It also gets particularly scary when I notice their eyes seem to be looking around at something that we can't see. For example, once my boyfriend's Vizsla was coming over to give me some love. I was sitting in the middle of the floor, beckoning her to come over to me. She was exiting out of my boyfriend's parents' bedroom, and she had to pass by my boyfriend's bedroom in order to come over to where I was. His bedroom door was open, and as she passed, she looked inside. She had a stuffed animal in her mouth, and when she looked over into his room, she dropped it and just started staring. She became visibly more agitated, and as soon as I said, "Sammy, what do you see in there?" she started barking like mad. So aggressive, and not like her at all, as she's very gentle but protective. Her gaze starts to shift forward, now looking ahead, as if whatever she was looking at in the room came right up over the front of her face. She then starts attacking the stuffed animal she dropped on the ground, as if it was alive, biting at it viciously and snarling at it. Her eyes are crossed in front of her, like she's looking directly in front of her face, and I could see this look in her eyes, like she was really scared, and shakes the stuffed animal around in her mouth violently, and then suddenly throws it really far up in the air and against a wall, almost hitting the ceiling. I know that dogs throw things around with their mouths sometimes, but she had never done anything like that before. She then came over to me with her head down, looking for comfort. It was so strange. About 2 months ago, and very important to note that I wasn't there, my boyfriend said that he felt something grab his ankle while he was sleeping. This is big because this is the first instance of whatever this is physically touching him. About a week ago, I had his house all to myself as he and his family went on a little getaway at a casino, and I stayed at their house to watch their dogs. That night, I wasn't in a good mindset at all, but was trying to have a good time by myself. I was hearing the scratching again, and frankly, just being annoyed by it. It was coming from the large pantry in his kitchen, and the scratching would get louder every time I would get closer and examine the inside of the pantry. I just tried to get my mind off of it, so I brought out my tarot cards. I know, probably wasn't a good idea if I'm trying to avoid activity, but the tarot cards keep my mind busy. It's a hobby I've been working on and developing my skills on for the past 7 months. I started out by arranging them in an arc shape on the table, like as if you took a deck and just spread the cards out in a smooth arch, all face down. Now, to be honest, I partake in the devil's lettuce from time to time, and this night was no exception, as I was not in good spirits. So to sum it up, it was making me awfully sleepy, and it was late, and I had to go to work the next day anyway. So I just left my tarot cards out like that. No intention behind it whatsoever, other than laziness. The next day, I come to the table to find that somehow a card had been pulled from the arch right into the middle of it. Now, you need to listen to me when I say that I did not do this. It wasn't a situation where I figured, well, maybe I did pull a card out and I forgot or something. No. I remember being immediately freaked out, but also excited. I figured, what's next to do other than flip the card over and see what it is? The card was the 5 of Cups, which, if you do tarot, you would know that it's probably in the top 5 most negative cards that you can get. It's a card that signifies grief, loss, and despair, and abandonment. Typically, people get this card when they've experienced a death of a loved one, or an intense breakup, or some other traumatic event. And the thing is that I've experienced all of those things recently. So, if this situation wasn't coming off as too complicated, let me add that both my boyfriend and I are actually polyamorous, so we had been in a relationship while also being with him, and that person dumped me, and the situation was frankly awful, and I was lied to, and I had felt abandoned. On top of that, this summer I experienced the loss of another guy I used to date. He died of an overdose, and I'm still grieving him. Even though we weren't together anymore when he died, I still considered him a friend. So about this card, it's strange because when I told people in my life about this, they asked me, did you feel threatened by this card being somehow magically pulled from the deck? And honestly, I didn't, because I felt whatever it was just telling me, this is you. Now see, if it was the death card, then yes, I would feel threatened. But this felt different, like you could say the 5 of Cups already represented me, so seeing that wasn't new information. Lastly, this only happened 2 days ago. I was out late, planning to arrive back to sleep at my boyfriend's house. I noticed he messaged me, "Where are you?" at about 11:30 p.m, which I thought was odd because he's not very clingy, and just in general lets me be me, so this made me worry. I wasn't able to get back until 1 a.m. unfortunately. When I come home, I find him sleeping in the guest bedroom. He says I'm not sleeping in my bedroom tonight, and when I ask why, he proceeds to tell me that earlier, while he was laying in his bedroom, he was watching something on his phone, and he was noticing shadows out of the corner of his eye, but he tried to ignore it. He then felt like something was on the bed, and when he lowered his phone down, he full-on sees a completely dark figure, like an outline of a large figure that was all black with no details, standing on its knees at the end of his bed, looking at him with its arms stretched out. Let's just say this really bothered me, because in my mind, this thing is getting braver and bolder, and its behavior is escalating, and me and my boyfriend don't want to wait around until one of us gets possessed or something. So let me get into some leads. Well, just one lead. So, the area where both me and my boyfriend live, in my opinion, is like the Skinwalker Ranch of the Pacific Northwest. I mean, the town we live in inspired the show Twin Peaks, and some of the first and much of the 3rd season of that show was filmed here. So on top of all this activity, something else I've been noticing is that my boyfriend has a neighbor who, very late into the night, is always shining really bright lights. In fact, so bright that people up to 10 miles away can see them. That's how, through small-town networking, I had met a man who also was seeing these strange lights. He's actually like the town's little paranormal investigator, and he invited me to do an interview for him to tell him what I saw. This man is older and has been around and knows a lot of history about our town and the area, and he's worked very closely with the native tribe in our town, as if you live in the PNW, you're almost guaranteed to be living on native land. He had told me during that interview that where my boyfriend lives is said to be an ancient burial ground for noble native people, as it's located on the side of a large mountain, which they thought of as sacred. He said he's heard of many strange things happening where my boyfriend lives, but didn't explicitly say that it could explain what we experienced within his home. This got me to thinking, and perhaps this spirit is of a long-dead noble indigenous man of high honor. Could that explain why he told me I used to be great? Some people I tell this story to don't think that, as they don't think a native spirit would be malevolent. But I'm inclined to think people who stole your land and now live on top of your grave would maybe make someone like that pretty angry. And frankly, that's all I have for an explanation. Some questions I have would be, could this possibly be an actual demon or a malevolent spirit? Another thing I wonder is that my boyfriend is always the one mainly seeing and experiencing the activity, while sometimes it messes with me in really weird ways. He seems to not like me and stay away from me. Why could this be? Because if demons or bad spirits are attracted to people with trauma and baggage and depression, then I should be a target, as I have those in spades, while my boyfriend is a relatively happy guy all the time.